Hi, good afternoon. My name is Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much for being in the session. I'm particularly delighted today because I'm in conversation about Sudeep Chakravarti's wonderful book, Clear.Hold.Build, which in fact I just reviewed also. It's a particularly interesting and powerful book at this point in time for all of us who work and write about business, in business, who consider and analyze business, and what business really means in the larger context of the country and the ecosystem in which we live and work in. When I read Clear.Hold.Build, I was particularly intrigued by Sudeep Chakravarti's intricate analysis of the larger moral context in which business works. And I think I work for the Fortune magazine in India, and I think often in the work that we do, we forget that business has a larger moral context. And I think Sudeep Chakravarti in this book does a marvelous job in bringing alive through nuance, through anecdote, through his research, the moral context of business. Why business is done, and I think Sudeep asks some very profound questions. I believe in business, I believe in the power of business, I believe business done well, profitably and morally can really have a transformative effect, and that Sudeep asks some very deep and basic questions about business in this book, which are not relevant only to India but to a larger audience around the world. He asked, in a sense, why is business done at all? What does it mean when people embark on a journey to do business? What does it mean to the people who face the entrepreneurs who bring business into an ecosystem? How does business transform those lives, and indeed how does the act of doing business transform the lives of people who are actually doing that business? And I think these are some of the most profound moral questions that Sudeep so wonderfully addresses in his book. So it's a real pleasure to be in conversation with him today.
Many thanks. Can you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? Glad to be here. I'm here after 4 years of boycott of the Goa Literature Festival. So I'm happy to come back home. Summer, he's a wicked boy. He's an old friend. But anyway, we don't have much time. It's a short session, so I just cut to chase. To take on from what Hindol was saying, and thanks very much for setting it up for me to take it ahead. Like Hindol and like many of us in this room today, I'm a sort of a beneficiary of India's liberalization process. A direct beneficiary, and I make absolutely no bones about it. It's done very well for me, I've done very well by it. Many things that I am today, including an independent writer, would not have been possible, ironically, were it not for India's liberalization process. But I've always been a sort of a votary, or actually a student of the notion, and increasingly for the last 10 years or so, that in all this aspirational conduct that we have, and which is a very fine thing, I grant it, I'm a member of that party. I think we tend to get blindsided with some of the things that we need to pay attention to. And I think India's businesses, alongside India's middle classes and India's policymakers, have also been very blindsided, deliberately so, to move ahead so quickly with the good news aspect that we've forgotten that there are some necessary news that we also need to take along with us. I.e., what happens when you make business plans sitting in Bombay, in Delhi, in Chennai, Bangalore, in Goa. And that's one thing, but when that business plan is effected from the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Industry or the boardrooms and the policy-making rooms of India, and then it's applied downstream, down the line, into what we call the project-affected areas, so on and so forth, there's usually a disconnect, because the so-called bean counter of the planner usually has no concept or understanding about how a business or a project can really affect the lives of people beyond just paying employees their salaries. And I think that has led to a lot of bad blood, unfortunately. I deal with issues of conflict, to do with the left-wing rebellion in India, aspects of Jammu and Kashmir, aspects of what's going on in the northeast of the country for the last 50 odd years. And that has led directly to this book, Clear.Hold.Build, Hard Lessons of Business and Human Rights in India, because I feel that in all these conflicts, there's been a disconnect between the policy at the top and the effects of what happens on the ground. And that is really why I do what I do. For instance, I strongly believe that while business is a good thing, business makes things difficult for itself, for more often than not. I'll give you a very quick example. Vedanta is a classic example. Vedanta is also easy meat. So I'm going to, while I give you the Vedanta example, I will be taking other names as well. I hope, even in the brief time that we have. Vedanta is a good example. For instance, it spent 1.5 billion US dollars, not for Vedanta, a very large sum of money as a conglomerate, but as a business operation. It spent $1.5 billion US dollars in a district called Kalahandi in Orissa to set up an alumina refinery with the assumption that it would be able to mine bauxite very easily. There was a huge bauxite hill just next door to the mine, which is why they located it there. They thought that they could do so without asking the local community for a consultation. They wouldn't even bother to do that. There is a concept in human rights called free, prior, and informed consent. It's a doctrine where it is based on the aspect that if you or I were to go, or any of us were to go and approach a business project and say take Cornelia's land, then the least we can do is ask Cornelia for permission for her land and have Cornelia informed about the project that we have in mind, consult clearly, transparently, and then if Cornelia is willing to part with the land, we pay her equitably and then ensure that when she's relocated, she's also resettled and rehabilitated. So these are processes which are common, everyday processes that take place or ought to be taking place. There's a disconnect. So what did Vedanta do and why did they run into trouble? They assumed that the government of Orissa would come through for them. So even though their project had been stalled, as late as the 2013 annual report of the corporation, without having got clearance from the community, they said, we will get this project up and running, i.e. we can mine in Kalahandi district, in what is called the Nyangiri hills of Orissa, which you know that my not so good friend Arundhati Roy and the former wife of one of my rock and roll idols, Bianca Jagger, they were in London about 4 years ago protesting in front of the Vedanta PLC headquarters, saying, what the hell are you guys doing, because you are planning to mine bauxite over there without consulting the local community. What they basically did was they took the community for granted. The government took the community for granted, and what basically happened is that the community said, you can't mine here anymore. Last year they had a Gram Sabha, as you know. And they said that we cannot, 12 villages and more, said that we cannot mine in our area because this place is sacred to us, our livelihoods will be ruined, so on and so forth. So you had a situation where a company, a conglomerate like Vedanta PLC, which has roots in Goa as well, as we well know. If you want, we can talk briefly about that as well. I have some very clear comments on that. So you had a company sinking in $1.5 billion US dollars, taking its shareholders for a ride, taking its stakeholders for a ride, in black and white in its annual report and disclosure documents, taking investors for a ride, taking the community for a ride, taking its employees for a ride. Now these are all things for which you can take a company to court and claim that we will get the project up and running. My simple question is, how can you assume to do so? So what I'm trying to address in this book, Clear.Hold.Build, is that I'm trying to drive home the message that it makes good business sense for companies to adhere to principles of human rights, or free, prior, and informed consent. It's, for me, good business practice. A good practice is good business, bad practice leads to bad blood, i.e. no business wants bad blood because it's bad for business. That should be the logical process. And even so, over and over again in India we see this backsliding, we have problems, you have a situation where negative energy is created on the ground when people are not taken seriously, they're not consulted. Police is sent in to deal with a situation which should really be a situation of dialogue. So in case of Vedanta, in the case of Tata Steel, in the case of so many corporations across the country, including in Goa, I've seen a mining situation in Kepe, Taluka, in the south for instance, where police goes in and acts as extension of a corporation. Police acts on behalf of a business to clear dissent when it should be a matter of dialogue. So these are issues that I write about in my book, and I think it's a great tragedy that I need to be doing this. Because if we are a democracy, we are a a so-called liberal economy and so a liberalizing economy, then this should be, I think, part of our evolving DNA. This should be something that we should be asking questions about very loudly and very clearly. And this is what I like to do through my book. Now, one of the things that I also like to do, and I think Hindol will agree with me, that is that I can continue for a long, long time talking about these issues. As you've gathered, these things are very close to my heart. I would like, frankly, to have a conversation with you because I believe that if there are issues or there are questions or concerns uppermost in your minds, I'd like to feed off those and I'd like to take it ahead. So maybe it would be spontaneous if Dilip was the first one putting it to, please Dilip. So.
You say it makes good business sense.
Yes.
So, right? Why do these businesses not see that? I don't understand. Like you don't understand. Why don't they see it?
Well, I do understand a little better than I used to. Let me confess. In fact, that's the whole point of the book as well. They do understand, but I think there is a certain arrogance of power that leads businesses and governments to behave the way they do. Unfortunately, the truth is that if businesses can get away with something, they will. And I think a lot of the times it drives businesses to do so. A very quick example. Tata Sons has bought over Chorus in Europe, right? In Europe, Tata Sons and actually, ironically, Tata Steel, which have gone and really hammered in this book. Tata Steel bought over Chorus directly, not Tata Sons. As a corporation, it was Tata Steel. It behaved impeccably in Europe because it had the European Commission tracking it. It had to conform to European law and European corporate behavior, which is very, very strict. So in Europe, Tata Steel was a perfect citizen. In Europe, Tata Motors was a perfect citizen after it bought over Jaguar Land Rover, for instance, right? But in India, this organization, and I promised you that I will not only beat on Vedanta this afternoon because that's easy meat, it's easy to beat on Vedanta, but let me take a respectable name like Tata, and I'm on the record here. And I still haven't been sued for what I've written about them in the book, so I think I'm on the right track. Tata Steel, the same organization that controlled everything in Europe, when it came to Orissa and its plant in Kalinganagar, we're setting up, in the process as we speak, of setting up a 6 million tons a year steel plant. On January 2nd, 2006, 14 people died protesting the erection of a boundary wall to the Tata Steel plant because the local community felt that Tata Steel had not discussed the issue with them. They were unresolved issues, they thought they would be taken for granted. Orissa police shot 12 local villagers. Now, this is the same company that is impeccably behaved in Europe, but has acted very trashy over here. And the Orissa government was happy to help Tata Steel get hold of what it needed to get. The district magistrate of Jajpur district, in which Kalinganagar is located, right, was moved to a similar district after the incident in the same capacity. And as we speak today, is the chairman and managing director of the Orissa Mining Corporation, which is partnering Vedanta in Lanjigar to mine bauxite, for which it has been prevented. Same man. The superintendent of police of Jajpur district was given a meritorious service medal by the President of India 2 years later. He is now with the Central Industrial Security Force. He got a commendation letter from his chief. Now, in Europe, Tata Steel would be out by 10 billion euro by now. It's between 5 to 10 billion euro, like the pharmaceutical companies.
In terms of like a penalty?
Liability. So now the thing is that when, and that belief is really where we're coming to, when now the situation is beginning to change with growth of, like, there is globalization of capital, there is globalization of markets, there is also globalization of activism in a certain sense. There's a great growth in communication. I believe it is getting increasingly more difficult for corporations to get away with these situations than they used to in the past. And this is Tata Steel we're talking about, okay? One of the most respected. So I think when they got away, there's a lot of introspection within the organization now, truth be told. But just imagine, I mean, in a company like Tata Steel, a house like Tata Sons, the most respected business house in the country, barring Infosys or some such thing. Let's not talk about Reliance Industries here. That's another ballgame altogether. So I mean, imagine an organization like this taking a community for granted. I mean, you might then say, Vedanta, oh, what did you expect? It's almost like that. So I think that it's come to a stage, and I'm also trying to nudge my readers and my audience, if you will, to that stage and say that, look guys, whatever the reason, whatever the purpose of you taking up the mantra, if you will, of business, of human rights in business as a part of business, do so, because it works every which way. It's good business for you, you don't waste time, and time is money, opportunity cost. You gain more revenue, you have a peaceable business, you have a good community relationship with the communities you're dealing with, it makes sense for you. Even if you do it with a cynical reason of less liability, that you will not be taken to courts and not be sued for bad business practices, even if that is the reason, so be it. You know? So that is really what I'm trying to drive at through my writing in the thing.
Just a little point about Enron,
right,
which got kicked out many years ago.
Yes.
When they were building that power plant in Dabhol, they
Yes.
actually, they're on record, they've written to the government of India saying, Enron does not want to be bound by the laws of India.
Exactly.
You know, by the labor laws of India. And so they want an exemption from that.
Right.
To do business in
Well, Enron, to be fair, they didn't want to be bound by the laws in America as well.
That's true.
And we know what happened to that. So I guess there are
But I don't know if they were that open about it in America.
not so open, but well, when we were exposed, but we'll come back to that. Sorry, Summer, Cornelia.
Can I say something?
Yes.
So,
This is like a fireside chat. Everyone
Yeah.
can say what they want.
when the mining business was shut down a few years ago in Goa, thousands of people lost their jobs. And now I don't talk about the ones who were running all the trucks and the barges. I speak about the helpers, you know, the unskilled workers. From one day to another, they were without a job. And they didn't know what to do, and I know from people in Miramar that they flocked towards Panjim and they threatened the security of Panjim, but nobody spoke about it. Nobody addressed this issue, not in the press, nowhere. I spoke to some Goan intellectuals about it, and their reaction was, yeah, but these people are not Goans, what they want.
No,
so I was really shocked about it.
I think that's a good point to bring up. This is a local issue, guys. So if anyone who's
Yes.
not from Goa, we live in this environment, so just indulge us our little incestuous
This is
universe.
actually a very interesting point, this entire thing about labor.
Yeah, I find this
think we
very
should-
disconnected.
yeah,
Shut it down.
No, I was just apologizing to our visitors
Yeah.
in this room, saying that let us, for 2 quick minutes, address a local issue, which is very important because mining in Goa is the second largest industry in town, or used to be, at any rate, along with tourism, with construction and fisheries, and agriculture is the other industry that is on. I think you're right, but I think that's a classic example of riding the boom in any which way. Carpetbagging, being cowboys in mining because the iron ore prices shot up from 2004, so everybody came in and did whatever they could, including subsidiaries of Vedanta. This is on the record. And the Fomento group, on the record, over here, okay. This is all on the record. They took, I think, people for granted. A lot of other miners did as well. Government was entirely complicit, the administration was entirely complicit, and now you have a situation where not just thousands, tens of thousands of people, whether from Goa or not, the fact is that it has deeply impacted the local economy. There's no other way to put it, and I hate to sound moralistic about it, but it's the truth. For the runaway greed of people who thought they could cash in on a boom when the going was good. Ergo, when the going became bad, the guys who cashed out on the money, they're okay. The people who have really been affected are the people who are employed, the ancillary industries, the people who really benefited, the villagers, the people whose shops were doing better, the grocers, the people who were drinking less because they had there were less problems at home because they had money to bring home. All kinds of bad things have happened because of that. That's really the point I'm trying to make. When you get too clever by half, when you're trying to ride a system harder than it needs to be ridden, you are unleashing hugely negative reactions, which which has happened in the gold mining industry. Now, what the hell, it's become a hot potato. It's become a political hot potato. Should it start? Should it not start? How will it start? Now it has conditionally started. But is anybody out there? No. Because there's so much of mess, regulatory mess to sort out. And because of the transparent greed of people, that you've really hurt tens of thousands of local people. So that's one thing. So we can talk about this, Cornelia, over lunch, which is not quite the right place to talk about mining in Goa, but we'll do it. Somewhere, if you will. Madam, my friend at the back is...
You know, your columns and I'm sure your book as well, explore in detail all the things that go wrong. But I was wondering if you can share with us some examples of Indian companies that actually get it right. And if there are examples, could you just tell us how they do that and who these people are?
Certainly. In fact, Tata Steel, I trashed Tata Steel a little while ago. Tata Steel usually gets it right, has done it right. Organizations of the Tata Empire get it right, for instance. Often, usually the bad blood comes in. Here, I think this caveat must be made, and I think a lot of us know about it already. Is that typically relocation and rehabilitation and bad blood issues come when there are usually vast acreages involved where villages are being affected. Dozens of villages are being affected. Several hundred or sometimes thousands of hectares to turn it into acre, multiplied by 2.47, you get acres, are affected. These vast landscapes, when they're, so typically extractive industry, mining, big plants, hydropower projects, so on and so forth, affect people like that. So if you want to look at clinically, if you want to look at good business practice, then you can have, say, a software company like Tata Consultancy Services, which do it right because it's very difficult for them to do it wrong. They need a skyscraper, they're going up. They need that little 5 acres of land in a vested industrial area, and they're good to go. But when another arm of the same conglomerate like Tata Steel needs 5,000 acres of land for its steel plant, or even Tata Motors, which needed less than 1,000 acres in Bengal for its car plant, when it's displacing agricultural labor, displacing land, it can lead to bad blood when this kind of conflict happens. So that's one example of how within the same group, some get it right by default, some get it wrong because they're taking other people for granted. I think there are some organizations that are trying to do it right. Tata Steel is, again, as I trash them, I would say that it's a good example. After this incident, for instance, and a lot of the bad blood that they've been receiving over the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a huge introspection within the organization to not depend entirely on government to take over land, to not depend entirely on the local administration and police action to do it, police action to do what they did earlier. But now there is a realization that it leads to just way too much bad blood, and it is really bad business practice. Unfortunately, I can't think of too many extractive industry names or metallurgical industry names or hydropower industry names that do it right. It is, unfortunately, there is no doing it right in this particular case. Because it also needs a government to back you up to do it right. That doesn't always happen. So it's difficult to come up with a big company in an extractive industry situation, a coal mine, for instance, or an iron ore mine, or a hydropower project, or a thermal power project, that does it right, or a stainless or a steel plant that does it right. It's a very difficult play here. You will usually find manufacturing, the so-called clean industries, even Coca-Cola, for heaven's sake, which ran into deep trouble in Kerala because they depleted the local groundwater sources and they poisoned they polluted the local groundwater sources. They're doing it in Haryana. So now, how will a company like Coke balance it out? They do what I call balance sheet CSR, corporate social responsibility. They're messed up badly in Kerala, so they will set up 50 schools in Haryana. So in their books, they balanced it. But the lives of people in Kerala, in that particular community where they're deeply affected, that's under no redress. That's carrying on as it is. So it's a bizarre situation. It depends on what industry you're in, what kind of business you run, what your corporate attitude is like. If you go to Coca-Cola website, they have the best CSR attitude in the world. But if you look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which is, by the way, PepsiCo's practice on the ground, they're doing what I call balance sheet CSR. I mean, it's disgusting. Somebody sue me. Etc. So it's a difficult question. Okay. Sorry, madam, you had a...
I was actually going to ask you what you thought of CSR.
Well, corporate social responsibility is a wonderful thing, and I'd like to refer to a situation from my book, if no one is okay with it. I'm more concerned that the fact is that with corporate social, corporate social responsibility. Some businesses, unfortunately, look at CSR as window dressing. It's a fabulous thing, and to my mind, how can it be wrong when you're educating somebody, you're paying for healthcare, you're got a hospital going, you're running a clinic somewhere, you're running a school, you're running better agricultural practices, you're doing watershed management, you're doing all this as part of your corporate social responsibility project, and CSR also begins at home. You're treating your employees right. Business and human rights, what we've been discussing thus far is also, it's basically extended to the world out there, but in gender practices is human rights related, so on and so forth. So it is CSR, it's a grand thing, but a lot of businesses, especially the businesses who are in messy areas, as Hindol will vouch for, they tend to take CSR as window dressing, as something that will make them look better. Vedanta, for instance, if you go to Bhubaneswar, has huge billboards saying, oh, we are the best in the world, we care about Orissa. But if you go to Vedanta's operations in Orissa or elsewhere, you'll find a radically opposite situation. Jindal Steel Works and Jindal Steel and Power Limited, when you land in Raipur, you will think that Jindal Steel and Power owns Raipur. And in a way, it's pretty much true. In the capital of Chhattisgarh. But when you go to Jindal Steel and Power's, and this is the gentleman who brought us the right to raise our flag in our homes, Naveen Jindal, okay? He empowered us to raise the Indian flag in our homes as we wished. The same flag-waving creature treats his communities very, very poorly, very, very shabbily, to the extent that people have been beaten up in the Jindal Steel and Power Limited coal mines, so on and so forth. So,
But they can wave the flag.
they have the flag. Now that's grand CSR. If you go from Raipur along, you will see the verge on the highway saying maintained by Jindal Steel and Power Limited. Now, as far as they're concerned, it's CSR. If you read their annual report, that's CSR. Now, my question is that CSR is what you make it. If you are doing it to hoodwink your investors and your stakeholders, and you're doing it as a delusional exercise to make yourselves feel good, and sort of do a three Hail Marys after you talk to the priest at confessional, or you take a dip in the Ganga and that polluted, that sewer that we have all the way down from Kanpur to wherever else it goes, Calcutta and Bangladesh. If that is the attitude, if you do that as sort of a dipstick CSR, then that's bullshit. It's rubbish. CSR, to my mind, should be what it needs to be, and that's again the universe for it is expanding, so on and so on.
I had a small question here. We've been talking about the companies and their roles, and in India, of course, it's rarely the company working alone. It's not like that anywhere else in the world, but especially in India, it's a collusion between the state and the company and so on and so forth. One of the interesting parts of your book, of course, is when you talk about you're in Kolkata and you're looking at the Shingur mess. And that appealed to me greatly because I spent many months reporting on Shingur. And you talk about you're having a conversation with a bureaucrat, right? And you basically come to the conclusion after that conversation that the Tatars easily could have accessed a different package of land.
Absolutely.
And somewhere in the conversation between the Buddhadev government and the Tatars, either the Tatars were told that you don't need to do that, you can get whatever you want, or the Tatars demanded something better, and then they landed up on a patch of land which was hugely controversial.
Absolutely.
And both parties, in some senses, the Buddhadev government and the Tatars, in some senses just thought it would magically happen. And that really resonated with me because all the months we spent at Hindol, you know, the Tatas kept telling us that, you know, we believed, we asked the Chief Minister, can we get this? They told us, Hoeja, you know, the Bengali word for
it'll happen.
It'll happen.
Don't worry.
You know, don't worry, we'll take care of it, right? Hoeja.
In fact, this what Hindol's talking about, the episode in the book, I'm sitting with a gentleman who was formerly the district magistrate of a place called Kharagpur, where the IIT is. The district magistrate of a district called West Midnapur, of which Kharagpur is a part. Now, this guy is telling me, it's a related matter that he's a old college friend of mine. You know how we get information. We call friends. And so he said that, look, I was the DM, District Magistrate of West Midnapur, when the then Chief Minister of West Bengal, came and said, look, the Tatas are coming, it's a big deal for us, Tata Motors is going to set up a plant. You have to do something for them. He said, no problem, I have vested land, which is basically already pre-acquired land, which is ready to run, and you can set up the industry. The Tata Motors people chose to go closer to Calcutta, to a patch of land which turned out to be hugely controversial, to the extent that Tata Motors had to leave the state and then went to Gujarat, where Narendra Modi, then the Chief Minister, gave them vested land. So their initial deal in Bangalore was exactly what Narendra Modi offered them later, but Tata Motors chose to not take that initiative and go into a situation where, and so I asked my friend, I mean, don't these guys do political due diligence? Because they do financial due diligence, they get suits coming in, consultants saying your money is all right, project due diligence, equipment, this is okay, that's okay, everything is done. McKinsey will come in, you know, the Accentures of the world will come in and do your studies for them, and you pay them billions of dollars. What about political due diligence? So this friend of mine looks at me and says, are you stupid? And well, I felt stupid because I knew the answer, but I had to still hear it from him. He said, of course they did political due diligence. Their political due diligence was, it'll get done. Yeah. Don't worry. So the state stepped in and guaranteed Tata Motors that it would get done. And of course it backfired horribly. People died, they were rioting, and also contributed largely to Buddhadev Bhattacharya and the Communist Party of India, Marxists, no longer being in power. And that lady who's Lady Voldemort, who now runs West Bengal, she who cannot be named, etc. So that you got that kind of situation happening. Now let me give you an example about how, from the beginning, something goes wrong. Do you mind if I
No. So I just wanted to ask you very quickly this, and could you elaborate a little bit on the role of the state in all of this?
Exactly.
Because you've spoken a lot about the companies. A little bit about the state, because you're on the topic of Buddhadev, you're on the topic of Hoejawe. Can you elaborate a little bit of your understanding on how the state contributes?
The state contributes because the state thinks they can get away with it. And in fact, that begins to my mind at the level of what we call the Memorandum of Understanding. You have state governments holding what they call investor meets, global investor meets, where deals are done in the back room already. You come, and I've attended several of them myself. And huge deals are announced. Now, these are deals that are already signed up for beforehand. Then they go looking for the, they know more or less what location they want. Then they go negotiating with the community. So you have pre-committed this deal, and then you're trying to ram that deal through. And that already feeds in its DNA, in its very DNA of the project, a certain degree of coercion. You're not consulting with people ultimately who you're dealing with. You're keeping it to the creamy layer. I'll give you a little example, and my young friend, I'll come back to you on that. There's a quick one. There's a chapter in the book which is called Marie Antoinette of Charkudi. Now we know who Marie Antoinette used to be. Charkudi, as you may not know, is a little village on the border of Jharkhand and West Bengal. A very, very, very pretty place. And there, I ran into a situation where Hindol Steel Works, which is run by the cousin of the flag-waving chap, okay? His name is Sajjan Jindal, not the flag-waving chap, his brother, his cousin. Now, they wanted to set up a huge steel plant in this village, only they didn't tell the villagers what they were doing. They used local, and it's a tribal area, where they have land laws, where outsiders can't purchase land. So they've gotten local people to buy land by what we call a benami transaction, a proxy transaction, in order to get into the land. You guys in Goa know all about it, right? So, sorry, just kidding. So then this corporation came in, and one day, these villagers who I later went and talked to, they got a situation where they suddenly found these 2 carloads of people coming in, going to the farmland, and then saying, acting very busy with these little, the geological instruments and all of that kind of stuff. So they said, what the hell are you doing? And who the hell are you? And what are you doing in my paddy? So they said, oh, we are doing prospecting for a railway project. These guys, nobody knew what the hell they were doing, but they were already mapping the land for a railway link to the proposed factory site. So the villagers chased them away, saying, get out. So these guys went to the local police thana and registered a case of intimidation and threats against the villagers. Instead of the local police helping the villagers, they arrested the villagers who were there protesting against it. Not saying, we won't do it for you, but saying, could you please tell us what the hell you have in mind? And I have a document which has 15 villages in that area with nearly 6,000 acres of land. Don't ask me how I got it. That's part of the deal we do, right? We get hold of things. Precise saying we want this land, that land, that land. Whatever land was earmarked, they were not told about it at all. So they go in, and suddenly what you have is that you have people getting paranoid. So suddenly 6,000 acres becomes 25,000 acres. That leads to 5 times the paranoia, nearly, okay? Our livelihood is gone. It leads to bad blood. It leads to opposition. Hindol Steel Works has till today not got more than 500 acres of the nearly 6,000 acres of land they want, because they took this, what I would call a sort of a shady route, rather than a direct route of consultation, with the full complicity of the government of the state. And then, this I can't resist. Vedanta, as I said, is like easy meat, but let's talk about less easy meat. Do we know who Adi Godrej is? Excellent. Now, so this Mr. Godrej, who's otherwise a good man, I think. He was asked, now this is the attitude of people who deal with business, important people. At this point of time, Mr. Godrej was the president of Confederation of Indian Industry 2 years ago, not too long ago. His solution to land acquisition and rehabilitation and resettlement issues is that he was asked by somebody in Tehelka, and she said, what about livelihood costs? So he shot back saying, what do you mean by livelihood costs? That's not an issue. If somebody gets paid a large amount of money for an asset, he can invest it and get a livelihood. Now, he is directly being asked a question about farmers, land acquisition, so on and so forth. At the bottom, people who are displaced, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we have an estimated 60 million displaced people in this country, of which an estimated 3/4 have not been rehabilitated. Okay? And the number is growing. So there's a logic to this. And so he's saying that, and this lady is asking him, saying, what about the money they get? There's no planning, it's going to run out, they have debts, daughters, weddings, so on and so forth. But Godrej had a different take on the compensation. He says, why should it run out soon? It can be invested. It can be made into a much bigger value than land. You guys are in Goa. This will strike deep. Land has the lowest appreciation of all assets. This is Ali Godrej. The best investments are in stocks. Somebody should advise them to invest it in mutual funds so that their wealth will rise faster. Now we all know what happened to mutual funds up until Modi took over the government, right? But till then it was nasty. No, as I read this, and I couldn't help noticing that Godrej is chairman of a company called Godrej Properties Limited, for instance, which has for decades prospered precisely because by realizing the value of land. Of course, it's not the same thing. Farmland and urban land which is developed is not the same thing. But it does bet on the principle of getting it at the cheapest cost, right? So, and you have this thing, and I said, what the hell? Let me take Mr. Godrej's wisdom to the farmers, okay? So I say, I look around this place in Chakuri with these farmers who've been arrested and released. They've been threatened by the government. They don't know where they're going to be. And they're saying, they offered up 5 lakhs an acre. but where will 5 lakhs, 5 lakhs an acre, but where will it go? Because I earn at lakh and a half to 2 lakhs each year with my crops. 5 lakhs will go in no time because that's the only asset I have. So I said, what the hell, let me talk to them about what Mr. Godrej, who's the president of the Federation of Industry, has to say. So I look around the shabby room, where my agitated hosts had brought me after a tour of the surroundings, and I decided to brave them and offer them Mr. Godrej's advice. I tell them that, what Mr. Godrej had told this journalist from Tehelka. So I say, but I do it with a slightly Livingstonian twist. A very big man, I said, a very big and respected sage, a businessman who dined with heads of states of India and other countries of the world, said that farmers needed to invest earnings from sale of land by giving it to a person or company that would play it in a bazaar. I mean, how else do I say what the stock markets are? Sitting in a tiny village on the border of Bengal and Jharkhand. By giving it to a person or company that would then play it in a bazaar and thereby earn them great income. And they're looking at me like I'm nuts at that point in time. And I tell them they have to do so because land fetched the least benefit. I'm telling this to farmers. Okay? With standing crop, right there. Full standing crop. And that's what we've been doing for years, decades. And I'm telling the farmers that land has no value. And they have to do this because land fetched the least benefit. And this state, this big, very big state, said that land has the lowest appreciation of all assets. And they look at me completely blank. And there I was, Marie Antoinette of Charcuterie. So I try and this is to me is an instance of how from the beginning, you're a business and a government who are pro-investor, pro-stakeholder, pro-citizen, create problems for themselves. From the beginning, from the stage of the MOU, from the stage of conception to the ending, there is so much arrogance of power, so much of taking for granted, that you're really making it a bad business practice. So that's something that I'm trying to convey over here in this book.
We've completely run out of time.
He's the Meister. So
we've completely run out of time. The lady there is. Okay, we'll take one last very quick question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so basically my question was, you mentioned Tata Sky,
Tata Sky is very good.
Tata Steel and how their behavior in Europe was generally much more diligent. And so then that brought my question as to why that isn't the case in India. And generally with human rights and these kind of issues, there are two ways to look at how the state is failing. And one is in terms of how it's formulating the policy in terms of framing the rights. So that like right to education and right to food come to mind. Or the other would be implementation. So which would you say is the more pressing issue in terms of the Indian thing? Do you think that we have the policy and it's about the framework of regulation, implementation not being carried out, or that there's a sort of a conceptual issue?
It's all of the above. You need, see, you can have all the grand doctrines of the world saying business and human rights, you have to protect human rights, you have to offer remedy, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the person who's guaranteeing human rights is the state, the government of a particular country and or area. It is not the citizen. It is not the company. The company may be implicitly human rights oriented, just for a good business practice, a sensible business practice. But the law of the land, at the end, holds that practice accountable, that malpractice accountable. So the law is very important. In India, our laws are getting better in various respects, but the implementation has been very shabby, and a lot of it is left to the local implementation. So while you might, Mr. Modi and his colleagues in Delhi might say that we have grand plans and all will be good and we will help the poor and the wealthy and the business, the guys who are actually implementing the project are the guys in the states, in Goa, in Orissa, in Jharkhand, in Madhya Pradesh, and so on and so forth. And even lower down the food chain, the power of arrogance food chain, if you will. So you need the monitoring down the line for that to happen. So the good news is that I talked about globalization of activism or networking of activism, judicial redress, communications, better communication. So I think communities are now more empowered through communication and realization of their own rights than they used to be before. Shareholders are more combative to companies for better returns. They see a malpractice in a company can bring good profits 1 year, but bad profits for the next 3. So they're more vocal. So these things are also, I think, beginning to keep businesses more on their toes. So it is really it's a whole universe. Many aspects of it need to come together for business and human rights to really work. But to my mind, businesses work on earnings, not ethics. So there'll be fast and loose plays over there. The idea is to get them to recognize increasingly that ethics is good for earnings. And that's what we're all about and what we're trying to do.
That's a fantastic note to end the session on. Thank you very much. Do read Sudeep Chakravarti's wonderful book, Clear.Hold.Build. Thanks, David.